So yeah, so you do that Legacy of the Void show match. BlizzCon ends. We're waiting for the new season. Eventually, it comes out that Life has been one of the main match fixers in the StarCraft 2 match fixing scandal. Can you talk about that?
I mean, I don't even know where to start because, first of all, okay, just in general, match fixing is obviously very, very bad, and it shouldn't happen. It's really dumb, and yeah, we won't even get to, everyone should know why it's dumb. We know why it happens, but it's still dumb. But what makes this so much worse in this context for StarCraft 2 is, first of all, ain't the first time for StarCraft. We know what it did the first time around in Brood War. And then, while StarCraft 2 was struggling so much, it seems like Legacy of the Void's coming out, and we got some new storylines. We're finally entering another generation of kind of players coming up, and we've got this next guy, Life, who's going to be the next big thing. Like, the timing of it was just as it looked like, okay, there could be a swing back to stability. And it's like, oh, well, actually, let's just put the nail in the coffin and completely crush it. And it's just, I think, aside from, okay, whether it kills the ecosystem or not, because, yeah, I mean, fine, it happens, but what always frustrates me about match fixing is it's always going to be done by the smartest people, because those are the only people who can actually pull it off. It's going to be done by the people who are good. It's going to be done by the people who can actually do so much more, because that's the only way you actually reliably make it work, right? For instance, it's the same thing with hacking, right? The best hackers are the smartest ones because they're the only ones who can figure that out. And it's always a shame because it's like, well, you could be using that for good. Like, you could be using that for something better. So why don't we do that? But when it comes to match fixing, it's like you're already public facing, and like, I can't imagine. I'm always so curious what the people who end up taking part in it feel like during the process, because it's like, surely you see the impact you're having positively. And at some point, I imagine you realize you're in too deep. Like, you can't get out of this. And you probably have a bit of an identity crisis of like, well, you know, what am I really to this community? What am I doing here? And eventually, I mean, probably everybody thinks they can get away with it, but the truth is eventually you're always going to get caught. It always catches up to you one way or another. And it's just such a darn shame, because the narrative around Life and anyone who beat Life or played against Life, it was so perfect for storytelling and story building. And yeah, it was really, really sad. Also because I had also, again, been spending less and less time with StarCraft, but obviously I held it very dear, especially all the people I met during StarCraft I held dear to my heart. And to see that happen and knowing there's no way out of it. I mean, it doesn't have to completely die out, but it will crush the souls and you have to rebuild. It's heartbreaking.
And do you remember the kind of the immediate repercussions? It was listed as one of the reasons that Pro League disbanded.
Yeah, so obviously the specific impact's much bigger within Korea, because that's where the actual crime aspect of it is going to come into play. But the problem now was that, first of all, gaming was now much more at the forefront. Things like match fixing were much more at the forefront. And so people had to take bigger solutions here to make an example out of this. They had to make sure that things were being done, because otherwise now you're going to catch fire from all sorts of angles that you don't want. And we've talked about other things when it comes to what could have contributed to the downfall or decrease of StarCraft 2 specifically in Korea. And yeah, you can talk about the region lock. Yeah, you can talk about all sorts of other things. You can talk about the game, the meta. But I mean, this is one where it's like, it's almost impossible to recover from this, because now there's an impact outside of the game, right? That's now everyone outside of the game also wants this to not come back alive. And that's the only way that they feel comfortable in saying that this isn't going to happen again. And then it's going to have an impact in other esports scenes as well. So now the other esports scenes also want this to be like, hey, like, put an end to this. We can't have this start to, bleed out and create a wildfire around all these other games. So I think it just created this really bad stigma about what's involved with esports and gaming, and they had to take a lot of measures, and obviously that's going to impact things like Pro League, because Pro League obviously was related to KESPA, and you go down that rabbit hole of, okay, well now they're they are much more public facing. You had to take drastic measures, and it's just unfortunate because yes, the only way to rebuild is to kind of raise the whole thing, but obviously no one wanted that at the time.
And even though you weren't really interested in StarCraft, it sounds like you were aware of the Savior match fixing scandal.
Oh yeah, I was. The biggest reason, there was no way for me to not be aware about Savior's incident in the past, is because he's missing from the OGN Hall of Fame. So in the old OGN Stadium in the arena, they used to still, even in the heydays of League of Legends, one thing that always stayed constant was, or the Wall of Fame, was the Wall of Fame with the golden mice and the golden hands, and Savior was just missing. That year's just missing. It's just not there. And so even if you didn't know, you're going to start to ask questions of like, well, why is one missing here? Like, this is kind of weird. And then you realize, oh, wow. So I had known that it happened, but quite frankly, it was once I joined OGN that I went back and looked up exactly the details and extent of the incident.
And as kind of like a general, gamer, you must be aware that Counter-Strike has had match-fixing scandals as well. Do you have any thoughts as to why that doesn't seem to have impacted that scene as much as the match-fixing scandals of StarCraft?
This is a bit of a loaded question, I feel. So when it comes to Counter-Strike, I guess I've never really thought about it too much. But when it comes to Counter-Strike and things like match fixing, I think everyone's going to give the same answer. Is the first thing that comes to everyone's mind has to be the fact that skin betting is already so rampant in that gaming community, right? And everyone thinks it's bad on the surface, but also a lot of people, even if they think it's bad, are also partaking in it. And it's just so widespread. It's just so common. So already we're skipping the aspect of, well, betting is bad. Because like that's like, well, it happens when it comes to CS esports. Whereas in StarCraft, it's like, well, it's like very underground. Like, no, you shouldn't ever bet on esports. You shouldn't bet on sports. Like, that shouldn't really happen. But in CS, it's like, well, I mean, I think it's bad, but all my friends are betting on skins and they're betting on esports. So I think that's part of it. The other part is that I think that's the impact of a 1v1 game, is that if you've done it, you've done. Like, there's no excuse you can make. It's you. You've made that choice. You committed the crime, and now you have to pay for it. But when it comes to a team game like CS, the worst cases are the entire team being entirely in on it and them all having to pay the repercussions. But sometimes it kind of gets brushed under the rug of, well, maybe it was one or two people, or or they were young kids, and it just moves on, or it's like tier 2 and it moves on, and then you forget, and it starts to get diluted of, okay, well, who was really at fault here? Do they have repeated offenses? We don't really know. But part of that dilution, again, is because betting is already so widespread. So I think people just aren't as harsh in their lens to begin with when it comes to CS, and I don't blame people. I think that's just the environment that game has created. But I would say that those are two factors I can think of.
Let's see here. One thing that I was thinking of while asking you that question, was StarCraft. We talked about the elitism of StarCraft, and you also mentioned, like, this is a Korean thing, this is like an Asian thing, right, as well. But I think there's actually some truth to it. You got your Korea boos who came into Korean culture because of StarCraft, myself included, but you also just had this aura of conduct, conduct that feels different than these other games, right? Because it is 1v1 perhaps, and even fighting games are drastically different. Do you have any opinions or any, kind of overviews as to StarCraft's kind of feeling that it's not just the hardest game, but it is one where you also are expected to be even like better mannered,
right,
than a lot of other video games out there?
going above and beyond the elitism of StarCraft, I think there was definitely an aura or atmosphere of prestige when it comes to StarCraft within Korea. And I think there's multiple factors. One, obviously, I think the fact that it's a 1v1 game, right? And so you have so much pride already. But two, I think this was one of the positive things to come out of KESPA being involved and there being the conglomerates involved in supporting this scene. So now every team has to hold all of their players up to a much higher standard. You can't make those mistakes because now that impacts the actual company and their image, and that's going to impact your support. So I think that's a big part that also helped. But also, and this part I'm not a fan of, but I think it created a good atmosphere for StarCraft, is going back to something I mentioned before when it comes to K-pop idol fandom, is that one of the big things that K-pop idols used to have, not anymore, but used to have, was mysticism, right? You could never show yourself going to the bathroom because it's like, well, we're like gods up here. Like, we don't go to the bathroom. It's crazy when you hear about some of these older like 90s K-pop idols. But yeah, they couldn't be seen going to the bathroom. Like they couldn't be seen like eating certain foods or whatever. And there was this aura of mysticism that they would hold. And I really want to believe, the more we discuss it, in fact, that the initial TOs and broadcasters kind of latched onto that same vibe when they were trying to promote these players of, okay, these are idols, these are gods above men, that they are just different. They're built different from us. And so you start to create this aura. The players already aren't exactly that talkative, and so it kind of goes hand in hand. And then probably some of them start to believe in that, right? Because the teams tell you that you have to act that way, the producers are telling you to act that way, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is who I am. Like, I'm just this stoic masterclass that's walking around. But I think it helped, and I do sometimes miss that a little bit from current esports titles. I'm not saying, listen, the trash talking, the joking, the fun content, I love it. That should stay. But you can still have this air of professionalism and mysticism. I think prestige is the best way to put it. And quite frankly, I would say the one person I can definitely say still holds on to that is Faker. And I think that's why he succeeds as a global icon in esports beyond League of Legends, is because he has a level of modesty, but a great level of confidence. He shows leadership. He shows this idea that, yes, I hold myself to a higher standard. Like, he's a living example of that. And I think StarCraft players in general felt that they always needed to have that.
It's very interesting. So what are your thoughts on kind of that old debate at this point? At this point we agree that Koreans are more modest, but it used to be called the Faceless Korean syndrome. Yeah. Yeah, what were your thoughts, especially because you got in 2013, this is where Stefano would also have still been a big celebrity, a big character back then. Yeah, that balance that is.
One of my biggest goals when I got into StarCraft was that I wanted to get rid of the stereotype that Koreans were faceless Koreans, that they were all robots. Player like innovation didn't exactly help, but that was one of my biggest goals. And I always say I used to actually watch a lot of Smix's interviews before I got started to learn, what works in esports translating, what works in translating in general, because I had never done it as a job before. But I always thought Smix did a pretty darn good job of it as well. And I could tell that she was pretty focused on that. But it helps also because she was so passionate about the game and the community to begin with. So it's like, okay, this is a good way to try to bring just something more out of these interviews. And I thought as I got into it, that's something that I want to do because I understand both cultures. And then I watch them on the Korean broadcast or in Korean interviews, or I watch them talk amongst themselves, and I'm like, you guys have so much character. And then we put a mic to your face in English, and you're like, I don't know what to say. Thank you very much. And I'm like, I'm telling you to speak in Korean. You just have to be yourself. And there's multiple aspects to that. Probably one is, again, this idea that even within Korea, they used to have to hold themselves up to a higher standard. And then it's global now, so they probably feel that pressure even more. And there's probably a bit more stage fright, because even though you can speak Korean, there's English all around you. I get it. But that was one of my biggest goals. And so I would like to think that I succeeded as much as I could. Again, except for a select few players, but I did my best.
Yeah, I kind of wish I could talk more about innovation, but disease domination is kind of too broad of a concept.
Yeah.
Looking at some of the last questions here, actually. Let's see here. First of all, so like kind of overall concepts, were you surprised by the foreigner participation in StarCraft 2? Because Brood War was so Korean-centric.
Yes, the popularity of StarCraft in general in the West was very surprising to me. Because I'll be honest, right? I got into StarCraft 2 a year later. I kind of held myself off from getting into StarCraft. But the only people I used to hear, talk about the game around me were my Korean friends. And so when I started playing, and I'm seeing all these content creators and players, playing StarCraft 2 and enjoying it, and then I see the following behind it and the viewers and the fans, and then there's more fans that are just playing the game. I was shocked. I was shocked because everyone seemed to agree that Brood War was a Korean game, but then StarCraft 2 wasn't. And it just was a little interesting that they could make this happen with a jump from StarCraft to StarCraft 2. And yes, you could argue, the brand name of Blizzard back then probably had an impact. And yes, people were starving for an RTS a bit. RTS was still held to quite a high standard back then. Yeah, I guess that helps. But it's just interesting that StarCraft 2 was able to kind of hit the ground running, I would say, in the West. And I'm not sure exactly why. Obviously, it was good for the game, but yes, I was very taken aback.
Was there any point, when you were working StarCraft or maybe just hearing things about it after, that you were like, okay, yeah, non-Koreans are going to start to be better at this game? Like, did you ever feel that Korean dominance was going to end?
No matter which game I'm working on, I am that one Korean guy that always hopes Korean dominance ends. Like, I want it to fail. Here's why. Korean dominance to me, in any game, is almost always because of how they perfect things. Yes, within Brood War, there was a lot of innovation, but that's because they were the only ones innovating to begin with. But in general, in any other game, Koreans are really good at taking an idea, a proof of concept that has been proven, adding one or two layers, because that's how you perfect it, and then perfecting it by grinding away. And the reason I want to see this fail is because I see this in everything Koreans do. And there was a interview that I've seen from an architect in Korea, a professor, where he talks about the same thing, and he says, the one thing he doesn't like about architects and architecture in Korea is that no one is trying to create something new. We're all so good at copying what someone else does. Korea is great at copying and then making that better. But you're never the creator of it. And the way he put it was, yes, we can copy, phones and make them better, right? We can copy this technology and make it better, but we will never be the creator of the iPhone. We'll never be that guy who made the internet. Like, we will never be the one who started the trend. We will be the one who perfects it. And yeah, we might get good sales out of it, but he felt that was what made a lot of things stagnant within architecture in Korea. And I've always felt, as someone who grew up playing music and studying music, that was also a problem in classical music in Korea. And I started to see the same thing in gaming in Korea as well. Now, Brood War is a bit of an exception because that scene was so flourishing within Korea on its own. And this isn't to say that there aren't creative people in StarCraft 2 even in Korea, but just the general tendency, right? And how you challenge each other is more about perfecting than coming up with new things. And part of that is, if you're at the top, you're so concerned with keeping yourself at the top. So you got to play it safe, right? You don't want to be the risk taker. And so I wanted to always see that fail. And in StarCraft 2, at first I was a little worried just because it's like, well, how do you beat, the 10, 20 years of history that this country has in perfecting this genre? But I would say pretty quickly I started to think, no, I think the West will eventually do it just because they're experimenting. And that means eventually they'll be the ones. There will be a patch that people just don't like, and they'll be the ones to figure it out because they'll experiment.
So you came back into StarCraft 2. What were you surprised by, I suppose, the presence of StarCraft 2 in the capacity that it is? Were you surprised by the crowd that was at Dallas?
It's funny, I thought you were going to ask, were you surprised that you were called to this event, which I was very much so. I was actually shocked that I was asked to work another StarCraft event, because in my head I was like, oh, I've like put this game to rest a long time ago, because I've made my peace with it. I've worked it. I'm happy with what I did. Well, I wish I did more with it, but it doesn't work out because I was working on other things, and now it's been long enough. All right, I'm just going to enjoy it from the sidelines every now and then. And then I get this email, and I'm like, you want me to work at DreamHack for StarCraft? At DreamHack? Like, not CS, not anything. You don't even work at StarCraft? Wow, crazy. So I wasn't surprised that obviously StarCraft had a place at all, but going there, and then even in the preparation up to it, watching the past couple of tournaments, I'm like, oh, okay. Still a pretty solid presence at these tournaments, and then showing up at Dallas and seeing the crowd gather, especially as the tournament starts to build up. Yeah, I was impressed. I was touched, really. And what really touched me, actually, was part of it. I thought, okay, maybe there's still a lot of OG fans. That's cool. But then I started to realize one of the funniest things I noticed from this event at DreamHack Dallas was when the talent announcement went out, and so many people were like, who in the world is Chobra? And at first I'm like, well, that's a little mean. I guess it's understandable, but I don't think I'm that forgettable. But then I saw some of the comments be like, well, I guess it's been a decade since he's worked a StarCraft event, more or less. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that is a long time. It has been a long time. But then that means that these are fans that joined afterwards. So, they might not be super fresh, but they're not like OGs in their 40s watching it. Like, these are new fans that are playing the game and getting interested. So I was like, okay, piques my interest. And then I show up at Dallas and I'm meeting all these fans that are telling me that they like recently got into StarCraft, or that they started following the scene like 2 years ago. And that was so cool. And it was a reminder to me, no matter the patch, no matter what happens, why there should always be a place for 1v1 RTSs as an esport, because there's something special about those factors combining. 1v1, commanding armies, RTS, sci-fi, all of this combined, there is a very intense place for that. Sometimes the audience is going to be smaller, but I think that was proof that there's a reason it exists, and there's a reason people like it. And so I was very, very touched and encouraged by that.
Actually, did you ever work with Incontrol?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you talk about his impact on StarCraft?
It's interesting that we would be talking about this now, because I think just like last week or sometime very recent, I had talked about Incontrol, I believe on my stream. And it just kind of happened, and the topic of Incontrol came up, and I mentioned it. And I was also actually telling my wife about Incontrol not long ago. And one of the reasons I brought it up, not to start on the somber note, is because I actually don't think I ever made peace with the fact that he had passed. Especially, I knew for a fact at the moment I didn't, on purpose. I kind of shut it out because, so at the time I had within the past 2 or 3 years, I had a series of passings close to me. Like I had heard news about, friends from college that had passed, and then, older relatives. And, the older relatives, it was by age and things like that. But obviously it's just as, someone in your, mid to late 20s, it's a lot to handle if it starts to kind of come at you. But I'm also trying to build this career that, that there isn't a path for. So it's just like a lot. And then for Incontrol, for Jeff, a lot of us heard the news when we were at WCG. And so we were already away from home. And so to me, it was just like, I can't handle this right now. And it was even worse because I remember thinking close to WCG that I should reach out to him more, because we never got that close. Like, we were very friendly on the scene, but I only started working with him, much later, towards the end of his career. And so, it was mostly just at events. It's like, oh yeah, we get to catch up. He's a very, very smart guy, very, very funny guy as well. And so I loved having him around. And he was actually very opposite to me in the way, he worked. So again, he was the guy who would push the buttons a little bit, break the rules a little bit, but you could tell. The reason I always respected Jeff as someone who was very, very smart is, again, he knew where the line was. He knew exactly how to toe the line. And you cannot do that unless you're very, very intelligent about what you're about to do, right? You're not just some silly guy who's just throwing things at the wall. Everything was so intentional with Jeff. And yes, sometimes he would cross the line, but whenever he does, he would also recognize that. And so at first I remember looking at Jeff and being like, not someone who meshes well with me. Like, I'm just this goody two-shoes. I follow the rules, do what the producer says. I'm just here to make the broadcast work. But the more I watched it, I'm like, no, someone like that is needed in the work we do. And in fact, someone like that compliments me so well. I actually want to learn more from Jeff. You know, and I took a lot from Jeff, actually, during the times that we worked together. And so I had so much respect for him. And I just remember thinking, you know, not long before his passing, thinking I should really reach out to him more and just, you know, catch up, even if we're not working the same event. You know, seems like a guy that I would want to learn more from and just get to know better. Yeah, and then I heard the news, so it was very hard, and I think I just kind of suppressed that memory because also I felt like I didn't really have a place to mourn, just because obviously so many other people knew him so much more intimately, and all those people I was close to, and I was like, well, do I have the right, you know, to be this bothered by this? But you know, time passes, and obviously now I've made peace with it. But I miss the guy, and I don't think I've met anyone quite like him within the esports scene in any game since then either.
Do you have any favorite moments of his comedy, maybe?
Well, so my favorite moment, it's a bit selfish. My favorite moment with Jeff is a non-public one, is the people who worked these events in StarCraft are going to be so sick of hearing this story, but my favorite memory of Jeff is me beating him in a pierogi eating contest. So, yeah, I mean, that was a pride point for me. But it was just funny because I remember I could tell the look on his face when, obviously Carmack was there as well. That's the only way something like this would happen. But I remember the look on his face when I said confidently, I'm like, no, I could beat you. I could beat you in a, and his face was literally that of, oh, I'm going to squash this kid so hard. He's so cocky. And I remember, I could just tell he's like, oh, I've never seen this kid this cocky before. He's so cocky. I am going to crush him. And then obviously anymore, and he's just sitting there like so full. He's like, all right, you know what? I underestimated you. But it was just funny because I felt like it was this moment where I'm like, yeah, I've got other layers too. Come on, Jeff, I've got other layers. So I felt like I earned his respect a little bit. But that's one of my favorite memories because it was also, I guess, one of the more intimate memories I would have because it was like between me and him, right? It was about me and him. But oh man, I mean, his comedy, I don't know if I could think of specifics, but he was always the one that would break the ice. And I just loved that. Like he was one of the first ones, definitely the first ones in StarCraft, but I would say in a lot of esports, maybe other than CS. CS has a couple personalities that are willing to do this, but he was one of the first ones that would bring production into it, like during the live show. You know, sometimes not necessarily in a good light, but just enough that you could laugh about it and move on, and it would actually be better for the viewers. And eventually, production would have to admit that that was good for the show. And as someone who worked on both sides of the show, I was like, this is really good. It's really smart. It makes it much more human. It makes it much more real. And those are probably my favorite moments, when he's just breaking the fourth wall a little bit.
He was great at that. Did you work with TotalBiscuit at all, or know him from his YouTube?
Well, TotalBiscuit's YouTube for sure. I mean, anyone who likes gaming content, you have to have known. Yeah, I got to meet TotalBiscuit a couple times, much less than Jeff. So when it comes to TotalBiscuit, my relation with TotalBiscuit was definitely one more of respect rather than a colleague. And I think eventually, and also I think anyone who's met him and gotten to know him would agree that he isn't the most approachable at first sight. He's got his own sense of humor. He's got that dry humor going on, you know, a lot. He's got that British humor going on. And then also you're usually coming from this aspect of, well, it's TotalBiscuit. Like, whoa, it's TotalBiscuit. So it's already kind of hard to approach. But then you do approach him and you're like, I don't quite know if this landed or not. Like, I'm not really sure how to read this guy, but we do seem to be in good company. So I was in that same boat where I was like, listen, I'm not trying to rock any boat here. Like, I respect it. If he's probably had to deal with this so much, and I'm not trying to fanboy over him. I just want to, get to know him as a colleague, but I'm not quite sure. So I'm just going to keep my distance. That was more or less our relationship. I think, I forget which event it was. I want to say it was Austin, but one of the last events he had worked, yeah. But then there were a couple moments, I don't even remember exactly what he said, but there were a couple moments where I could just tell, like, he was speaking directly to me, but very candidly. And I felt, oh, okay. So he also recognizes and respects me as well, just as a colleague. Now it's much more comfortable. Unfortunately, obviously, we all kind of knew that it was going to be one of the last times we were working with him, but that was a relationship where I just thought, okay, well, I'm glad we got to even work together and at least get to know each other. But yeah, TotalBiscuit, I think for me, I'm more in that gaming audience category where, to me, he was the gaming channel on YouTube.
Last two questions here. What do you think the legacy of StarCraft is? 1 and 2, some of the people's answers have been, that it kind of birthed a lot of the modern esports. It perfected the professionalism. Some of their answers have been like, people still refer to like the NASL sound guy.
That's true.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
It still resonates throughout the community. I mean, Twitch came from it. TotalBiscuit's emote is the LOL emote. So along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah. The legacy of StarCraft. I'm hesitating on my answer because maybe this is going to sound cheesy, but I don't know if we should say that there is saying that there's a legacy of StarCraft makes it sound like it's over. It sounds like the impact it can have is over. Let's put it that way, right? Obviously, it doesn't have to completely die out, but it sounds like, all right, the impact's done. What do you remember from it? Yes, there were a lot of impact points, but unfortunately, I also think maybe some of the bigger impact points are getting lost. So, for instance, it's very easy for those of us who know about StarCraft to say, well, StarCraft probably really helped birth like televised esports. Okay, that's probably factually true. A lot of Western fans, a lot of CS fans will argue that no, well, Quake and CS in the West. But in terms of televised regular leagues, you can't deny that Korea helped start it, and that set a standard for how esports eventually evolved. So that's true, but how many fans of League of Legends, even current Dota 2 fans, let's say current CS and Valorant fans, how many of them would know, let alone agree to that? I don't know. That doesn't mean that it's not a legacy. That doesn't mean it's not impact. But to me, I think that's one of the reasons I would like to think that StarCraft Impact isn't done yet, because I think StarCraft will always have lasting impact. At some point, it will create really lasting impact that you can't deny, that you don't have to teach through a history book. And to me, that part probably lives with the 1v1 RTS aspect. And I think that part is still will have impact in one way or another, once again. And that's the hope I would like to hold out onto. But I guess, in some ways, maybe it's even greater that it has some of these, I guess less nuanced impacts, right? Like TotalBiscuit's emote, or, whether it's some of these memes that started from StarCraft that people forget the origin of, but, it still exists. And sometimes that's greater, because it's like, wow, it just survives even without StarCraft now. So it's like, okay, that's cool. But yeah, I would like to think, just because I still hold by the fact that I think 1v1 esports really, really have a special place, and I think they are some of the most enjoyable to watch. And then on top of that, RTS combined with 1v1, I think has a very special place. And I think that will have impact once again.
And finally, what does StarCraft mean to you?
StarCraft helped me get passionate about my job. I had my job not because of StarCraft. I had my job because of League of Legends. I will always give League that credit. Obviously, my biggest career was in League of Legends. But I think me joining StarCraft 2 late actually was very positive for me, because I was in the thick of things as League of Legends was becoming more and more systemized. And then I got into the scene that had so much history and so much just pure passion around it, right? And things were getting rocky when I was joining the scene, and yet people were still just happy to be playing and enjoying the scene. And that was such a good reminder to me about why we do what we do and what we are doing in of itself. It's watching and talking about video games that we like and competition that we like. So to me, StarCraft is the game that I think instilled that in my heart after my career started. Before, as a fan, sure, a bunch of other games. But as we all know, once your hobby becomes your job, it becomes a job. And sometimes it's very hard to break away from that, which causes burnout. But StarCraft was the one that reminded me, no, this is fun and it's cool. And it's worth holding on to the communities you make from this. And that's what I would give StarCraft credit for.